Hello everyone and welcome back to another Star Wars figure review. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of taking a look at a recent release from the Black Series or the Vintage Collection, I thought we'd take a look at a figure from the 1990s. I'm on a little bit of a nostalgia kick at the moment with the Power of the Force 2 line that was put out by Kenner between 1995 and 2000. I've picked up a few figures that I always wanted as a kid or never got around to picking up when I was a kid on eBay. And as such, I'm putting together quite a collection of Power of the Force figures. Now, before I jump into today's review, just wanted to give you guys a quick look at how my Power of the Force 2 collection is coming along. Now, I'm not by any means trying to complete this line because there are a ton of figures from it that I just either don't want to pick up because they're not that good, or they are getting quite tricky to track down. I remember years ago attending conventions and toy fairs and all that sort of stuff and finding these figures incredibly cheap. And now when you scour eBay for them, some of them are a little bit more expensive than they used to be. So they're not quite as accessible or easy to pick up as they once were. So what I'm doing is, as I mentioned, I'm just trying to go back and pick up some of the figures that I either had when I was a kid and have since lost or damaged or whatever, or I never managed to pick up when I was younger. This is essentially my vintage Star Wars. I grew up in the 1990s, and this was one of the toy lines that I was collecting during that time. It doesn't come much bigger in terms of nostalgia for me personally than this, and I wanted to share it with you today. We are going to do an individual figure review, but like I said, I just wanted to go over my Power of the Force 2 collection as it stands at the minute and give you guys a little bit of a look at what I'm putting together within the collection itself. So as you can see, I've got quite the collection of loose figures at the front, a few carded samples at the back. And I'm just really happy with how this collection is coming along. Some of my favourite figures to ever be released are hidden within this line. And as I said, we're going to take a look at one of them in today's review. And the figure that we're taking a look at in today's review is this one. This is of course the AT-AT or AT-AT driver, and this one comes to us from the sort of back end of the Power of the Force line. This figure was released in 1998, and it's a figure that in many ways is sort of a holy grail item for me personally. This is a figure that I spent hours upon hours drooling over and wishing that I had as part of the Action Figure Archive book that was released by Steve Sansweet back in the 1990s. This figure was just everything to me back then. As I said, I never owned it when I was a kid, as much as I'd have loved to. So to have it in the collection now is just really cool. And it doesn't disappoint. Obviously, the Power of the Force line has a bit of a reputation for being the line that introduced buff, He-Man-like action figures into our Star Wars collections. But by the time 1998 rolled around, these figures were getting slimmed down, they were starting to look a little bit more realistic. And this figure is one of the better examples of the Power of the Force 2 line at its peak, in my opinion. Now, before we jump into the review of the figure itself, we are going to take a look at the packaging that he comes in. But one thing I really want to point out about this particular packaging is Hasbro, if you're watching and you're planning on doing, going all out with regards to this 50-year celebration of Lucasfilm, please put Black Series 6-inch figures on Power of the Force cards. I think that would be fantastic. So we are going to jump into the review of this figure in just a little bit, but before we do that, as always, let's take a look at the box that he comes in. So we do have a really cool card back for the Power of the Force 2 line. For those of you that weren't collecting during this time, you probably won't have seen many of these knocking around, but for me, this epitomises Star Wars. I know a lot of fans and collectors really do sort of rely on the vintage card backs of the 70s and 80s to really hammer home their nostalgia and that really defines Star Wars. But for me, this is what I grew up with. This is what I remember seeing on store shelves back in the 90s, and this is what I remember collecting back when I was young. So this is really, really cool to have in hand once again. As you can see in the top corner of the box, you've got this really cool image of Darth Vader. You've got the Star Wars Power of the Force above the bubble where the figure would sit. What we used to get with these as well were call outs for the character on the front of the bubble, including the accessory that they came with. So as you can see, the AT-AT driver comes with an Imperial issue blaster. And then towards the end of the Power of the Force line, Hasbro, or Kenner at the time, began including freeze frames with their figures, which were basically little slides that could be placed into a slide projector, a standard slide projector, but also a slide projector that Kenner put out, which was modelled off of Luke Skywalker's Hoth macro binoculars, and you could put that in there and take a look at scenes from the movie. So this is the one that the AT-AT driver came with, and it depicts the AT-ATs on Hoth, as you can see. Very, very cool indeed. These were displayed at the side of the figure. And then on the reverse side of the box, you get an image of, or at least an image that represents the character. So obviously we don't get to see much of the AT-AT drivers in The Empire Strikes Back, so we just have a Battle of Hoth image itself. And then we do have other figures available in the Power of the Force 2 line. Now, as I said, towards 1998, we did get some incredible figures in this line, and another one of my personal favourites is the Darth Vader with removable helmet, which is a figure, in my opinion, that still holds up today, at least in terms of sculpt. And that's one thing to really point out about these figures as well, that the details and the sculpts themselves were really, really good, especially, as I said, towards the end of the line. Now, as you can see, you've also got there the call out for the macro binocular slide projector, which you used to have to mail away for back in the day. And you've got all the Kenner information down there at the bottom. So pretty cool stuff. Really nice packaging. Again, I've got a lot of love for the Power of the Force 2 cards, so hopefully we see some more of these released later on down the line. So on to the figure itself. As I said, this is a little bit of a grail piece for me personally. I always loved the design of the AT-AT drivers, and never actually owned a figure of these guys when I was younger. The first figure of the AT-AT driver that I managed to pick up was from the Saga collection back in 2006. It wasn't through lack of trying though. As I said, I always wanted one of these when I was younger. Used to spend hours looking at it in the Action Figure Archive book. And it's actually the second AT-AT driver figure that was released as part of the Power of the Force 2 collection. The first one was included alongside General Veers in the AT-AT vehicle itself. However, there are some slight differences between this single carded release and the figure that was included with the vehicle. I believe that the figure included with the AT-AT Walker had a different stance. This one is much more of an action pose, you know, he's sort of got a mid-step going on. But still a very, very cool figure nonetheless. I absolutely love the look of the helmet. Again, the sculpts themselves, considering the time that these figures were released, are not to be sniffed at. And I really, really like them. I still think that some of these figures hold up today. Particularly sort of some of the aliens. You saw when I gave you a look at the packaging, we had an Ishi Tib on the back of the box. There was Pote Snitkin. Tons and tons of cool characters were released in this line. And I think Hasbro could take a page out of their own book and give us some of those background characters in the 3 3/4 inch line today. Now, as I mentioned, the figures towards the end of 1998 were starting to slim down a little bit. They didn't look as buff as the He-Man style steroid-ridden figures we had at the beginning of the line. This figure is still a little bit muscular, but in that respect he's nice and sturdy. Quite a nice bulky figure. Certainly looks the part. And in terms of articulation, these figures were very primitive. They were 5 points for the most part. We had normally swivels at the head. However, this figure doesn't seem to have one. The head seems to be glued down, whether or not that's just my sample or whether or not that was a thing with this figure, I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is the first time that I've owned it and I've only picked it up recently. You have swivels at the shoulders as well, a swivel at the waist and swivels at the hips. So if you did want to place him inside an AT-AT, you wouldn't have any problems there. But again, the real charm with these figures, and particularly this one, lies within the sculpt. I think the detail work on the chest apparatus is really well done. You've got really nice paint applications on the helmet in the form of the Imperial Cog emblems, the Stormtrooper helmet faceplate there, tubes, all that sort of stuff going on. Really good stuff. And again, I'm just a huge fan of not only this figure, but the majority of the Power of the Force line. I think that's certainly something that doesn't get enough credit, is the amount of detail and just the level of detail that went into the sculpts themselves. Certainly were underappreciated, or are underappreciated now in my opinion. Now, as you can see, he does come with an Imperial issue blaster rifle, a little bit bigger than the ones that we see with current Star Wars figures, but this was always one of my favourite blasters, one of my favourite weapon sculpts back in the day. Used to love owning these. Always had a soft spot for the E11s. As you can see, this one's got a slightly modified scope on the top, which I don't think we ever saw in the movies, but was quite a prevalent weapon with some of these Power of the Force 2 figures. And yeah, just looks really cool. So very happy to finally own this figure in the collection. Because he's a somewhat dated figure, he obviously isn't available now to buy in stores, so the best bet if you want to add this one to your own collection is the secondary market and eBay, and this is one of the figures that tends to fetch towards the higher end of the price bracket. I paid just under £12 for this one, I think, but these figures range anywhere from £9 to £25 I've seen on eBay, so just keep your eye out. Definitely worth adding to the collection, and as I said, if you're a fan of the Power of the Force 2 line, this one's a must-have. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I'll be back with some more modern Star Wars figures very soon, but as I said, just wanted to give you guys a look at my Power of the Force 2 collection, give you guys a little bit of an insight into what I'm putting together in terms of displays within my collection setup. And if there's any other figures from this line you'd like to see me review in the near future, please do let me know. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this figure. Let me know what your thoughts on the Power of the Force 2 line are. I'd love to know. It's one of my favourite lines that Hasbro or Kenner have ever put out. And again, would love to hear your thoughts. So thank you for watching, guys. I'll be back with some more reviews, as I said, very soon, so stay tuned. And until next time, as always, keep collecting, and may the Force be with you.